This is your wake-up call.
This guy's garage. Like and sub.
I'm going to ask my questions to Mr. Jean through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jean, since you last appeared before this committee on April 18th, you met with the Prime Minister's rapporteur, David Johnson, and at pages 22 and 23 of his report, he confirms that you are the author of a 2017 PCO memo to the Prime Minister that had been reported by Global News. I'm going to ask you some questions arising from Mr. Johnson's findings. Did you prepare the memo at the request of the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford?
So, first of all, let's maybe try to clarify what has been reported in the media versus what is the memo that I sent, and I think the Rapporteur General did that also in his report. The reports by Global News, according to what the Special Rapporteur have said, referred to a draft of that memo, an earlier draft version that would have been leaked. The Rapporteur General, I've had a chance to see that draft. I have not had the chance to see that draft. Now, the one thing that has changed since I've appeared in mid-April, I've had a chance to see my June 2017 memo. And also because it's been made public that I'm the author, I can at least talk about the fact that generally what was in the note, although I cannot talk about the classified information itself. So, I was the author of the June 2017 memo that was sent to the Prime Minister, like the author, the final author, the person who signed the memo, yes.
Did you prepare any of the drafts?
I would have seen some draft, right? It's always the way it works, and you see some earlier draft, you make corrections, it returns. I cannot say whether I've seen the draft of Global because I've had no access to it, and I don't see all earlier draft too, so.
The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, asked you to prepare the memo.
I have no recollection of a request being made to me for a memo by the Chief of Staff. That doesn't mean that was not the case. It could have happened in the context of they have a regular briefing with the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat. Maybe they'd ask for that. That's possible. But to me, no.
No. So your answer is no, she did not request that you prepare the memo.
Me, no. But as I said, that does not mean that the initial request may not have come to the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat, who do regular briefing to the Chief of Staff and at the time the Principal Secretary.
Who was the point of contact that resulted in your involvement in the memo?
There was a number of reasons. As I said, I can talk generally about the memo. So there was a number of reasons why we wanted to do that memo. We were more and more concerned on some of the activities by China. I've said here that before at my last appearance. We were very concerned at that time about economic security, China trying to acquire sensitive technologies, and it is actually a good case today where this country has acted very responsibly, and we've seen as one of the countries that has sharpened quite a bit its instruments when it comes to protect sensitive technology and all that. I can say more of that in others. I've mentioned in my last appearance that before the election of 2015, I was Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. We had issued a notice to diplomatic missions to stay out of election. We were seeing growing concerns that at the local level, maybe some foreign state actors were trying to connect with people. We were concerned about our research. We were concerned, as you probably remember at the time, there was a huge corruption.
Thank you, Mr. John, and I apologize for interrupting, but my time is limited.
Yep.
And following up on where you more or less left off, Mr. Johnson states in his report that an earlier draft of the memo contained language similar to what was reported by Global News on February 8th, namely that Beijing operatives were, quote, assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices, closed quote. Mr. Johnson states, however, that, quote, the draft was significantly revised before the memorandum went to the Prime Minister, closed quote, and that language specifically warning of Beijing had been removed. Who objected to the initial warning about Beijing assisting Canadian political candidates?
First of all, I've not seen the draft memo that Global assumed to have seen. In fact, Mr. Johnson seemed to have seen a different draft than what Mr. Cooper reported on. Secondly, the note that I sent warned about all kinds of foreign interference activities by China, so therefore there were certainly no objections in sensitizing the government. In fact, one of the main reasons for the note, on top of trying to sensitize the government that we needed to be very conscious, was we had the U.S. election. A lot of the focus was on cyber foreign interference, and we wanted the government to understand that whatever tools we were going to develop needed to be as effective to fight analog foreign interference. And in fact, what were the tools that were adopted after, the special task force, the protocol and all that, apply as much as on cyber foreign interference as they do on analog.
Well, did anyone, so you did sign off on the final memo,
Yep.
and the final memo contains language that, as Mr. Johnson says, was significantly revised, and that there had been there was a suggestion that it be general, that no single state be specifically identified. Why?
No. First of all, that's not what the Rapporteur General report says. It says that whatever actions you take, we should be careful. He was talking if you take actions. In terms of the memo was very clear that we were concerned about growing activities of foreign interference by China.
Don't do it. So
In fact, the first question the chief counsel, the rapporteur, told me is your memo is quite clear.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer.
Mr. Juno Ketsuga, I do have a question for you. You have been to the committee back in May on the 11th, and you talked about one of the biggest gaps, of course, being the nomination process. We know that every party has its own process of how they do nominations. So I'm just wondering, when we look at this and we see that there's a particular gap there, and we recognize that there may be a lack of information or a lack of awareness at that party level, how do we sort of bridge that gap? Because it's very important that in the roles that the government play, that they're not seen as partisan, but it seems to me that the parties themselves need information to be able to address these kind of particular gaps that lead to greater vulnerability. And I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations for us on that.
Right from the get-go, it's a question of communication and to warn the general public or to educate the general public in large. I would follow on what Monsieur Jean has said as well, is that we need to mature as a country in terms of the knowledge of what national security is about and what role every single individual in this country plays in national security. I suggested and I recommended, for example, that for every candidate of any parties, they sign a declaration on their honor that they are not either influenced or under the authority of a foreign state. Same thing for their staff. At the same thing, because if we go just with the allegations or the media reports, it looks like that in 2019 there was some people that were on the payroll of a foreign country. So we need to be capable to have this kind of process, because if we do find later that you were lying, you should be prosecuted. Let's remember one thing. Foreign interference is not only done by diplomats. Foreign interference is done also with Canadians who helps those people. And what they do is close to treason.
Mr. Johnson's report says that one of the earlier drafts of the 2017 memo referred to or contained similar language to what was in Global News that said that there was language to the effect of Beijing agents assisting Canadian candidates running for political offices. You said you didn't see that particular draft of the memo, as I understood you. Mr. Johnson then at his report states that it was revised and, quote, this memorandum warns him being the Prime Minister, that public efforts to raise awareness should remain general and not single out specific countries because of diplomatic sensitivities. So I ask you again, why was a decision made not to, for example, identify or point out the threat posed by Beijing? Why was the language changed?
The note is very clear that we have to be concerned about China, that there are growing concerns. It gives all kinds of examples. I'm not going to go into all the specifics. And that in this context, in the work that we're going to try to do to protect our elections, because efforts were underway with the Minister of Democratic Institutions in terms of developing some of the mechanisms that followed, we should also make sure that we have mechanisms to deal with analog threats like the ones that are described. The one sentence that you're referring to, I just want to remind you that at that time, CSIS had not yet started to name China in their annual CSIS foreign interference. It's only recent that we started to name China. The memo invites actions on the way on cyber interference to include, it's not say don't take action, it's just saying in doing that, you may wish to manage the foreign relations aspect of it.
Okay, thank you for that. And I will, in your opening remarks, spoke about the Australian model. I would note that Australia has criminalized assisting a foreign intelligence service, something that Canada does not have. Do you think that such a step would be helpful in countering foreign interference? And I will give you the balance of my time to elaborate on some of the points you wish to make about the Australian model.
I think that what you definitely need is there need to be real deterrence. So whether it's through the criminalization of some other penalties that you have if you are involved in foreign interference, when I speak about 2017 and how deep they were in foreign interference, there was a senator who had allegedly shared classified information with China. They had all kinds of concerns of that nature. So if we're going to have a foreign registry, that's one thing. But if people, because a foreign registry will be good for the people who, because of their occupations, lawyers and people like that, will want to comply with the law. So as long as there's not huge exemptions, as there are in other things, it will have some effectiveness so people will comply with the law. There are people who choose not to comply with the law. They need to be deterrents. And deterrence means penalties, whether it's criminal, whether it's monetary, but there needs to be real deterrence. That's crucial. You definitely need to do something about providing more ability. On problem number one with the surveillance and intimidation of the diaspora, and I was really happy to hear the RCMP testimony this week, we need to work with the communities that they feel confident they can come forward. And then when people are taking action, that they're trying to intimidate people in the community, there should be actions taken against them. And that's critical. In the last couple of years, the work I do, I meet a lot of young Chinese people who say their parents who are dissidents, and their parents say, I'm scared of what you're doing because either us or our family back home is going to be, intimidated. We need to be able to create space for Canadians who are harassed, intimidated, to be able to come forward. So there's a number of measures. I said I have a document that I'd be happy to share with the committee. But to me, yes, you're trying to shed more light on this, but please, to all parties, go above partisanship and focus on a strategy that can undermine foreign interference. It is on their national interest.